Hello and welcome everybody, it's your boy T, bringing you a cast of Total Warhammer 3 Domination mode. So I know a lot of you guys are going to be watching this who are familiar with Dawn of War 2, so I'm going to do a little bit of background on half speed at the moment about what the hell this game mode is. So this is the multiplayer for Total Warhammer 3. This is the standard battle type that you're going to encounter if you play ranked. You have 3 points on the map. It's pretty simple. You capture a point. Once the 3-minute timer at the start of the game has ended, you'll be able to capture the point, and units capture the point at different rates. Flying units can't capture it at all, but cavalry catches it at a slow speed and infantry captures it at the fastest speed. Every point that you own generates you 5 tickets per second. Once you reach 5,000 tickets, it's game over, you win. So it's not like Dawn of War 2 where you need to have the majority of the points on the map in order to actually generate points. Regardless, what is this match going to involve? It's going to involve the forces of Grand Cathay, as you can see here. Lots of peasant troops. This is Fantasy China in the Total Warhammer IP. Led by one group of Jade Warriors at the front. And there's also a couple of spooky hot air balloons. So we've got a Sky Junk here, which is kind of like the big artillery unit of Cathay, one of their premier units, and you've got the Sky Lantern with the Lord Magistrate, which is actually my Lord choice. We'll talk more about them later on. These are quite unconventional, but they're particularly good in the Slaanesh matchup. And we also have Great Longbow Riders, which are tier 5 cavalry for Cathay. Very low in models, which is a really good thing because it means you don't get DPS bleed as they start to lose models. They've got extremely high charge bonus, but their actual in-combat stats are not very good. 36 and 34 for the price that you pay for these guys. Not very reliable. They're going to be fighting up against Slaanesh now. We don't see any big Keeper of Secrets leading the forces of Slaanesh. Instead we see the Herald of Slaanesh on one of her Exalted Seeker chariots. Now Chariots of Slaanesh are actually bugged at the moment, but the Exalted Seeker chariot is fine. It does some pretty good damage, but the other chariot options for Slaanesh, they mostly seem to knock over your opponents and not actually doing any damage to them, so they're pretty useless. But this guy, nope, she does damage. He, she, I mean you can call it whatever, it's Slaanesh. They do damage, but they're not a Keeper of Secrets, so they're obviously not good in 1v1 duels, but they're very good for disrupting those masses of Cathayan infantry. We also see 2 Exalted Demonettes of Slaanesh. Don't actually recommend bringing these guys at the start of the match. I recommend bringing them in as reinforcements because they're just not very good duelists. I mean, they're fine, but they're really expensive. So what you don't want is to be sending these guys with a 15 armor up against Peasant Long Spearmen who basically cost like a quarter of the value of the Exalted Demonettes. And yes, Peasant Long Spearmen will lose, but they'll actually hold up really well and take off a lot of the Exalted Demonettes' HP. However, they don't just have Exalted Demonettes here for Slaanesh, we also have some Marauders. These Marauders have some pretty spooky spears. Pretty good choice, to be honest. You want to mix in a lot of Marauders with sword arms and spear arms because cavalry is going to be quite vital in this matchup. And speaking of cavalry, we have some Heart Seekers of Slaanesh down here. These are Exalted Demonettes riding Seekers of Slaanesh, so again an extremely expensive cavalry piece. I don't think that one Heart Seeker is particularly bad in this matchup. These guys will do insane damage if they can get the flanks of an opponent. Note that Slaanesh as a faction has a lot of devastating flanker bonuses. This means that they get double charge bonus whenever they attack the rear or the flank of an enemy. When you get a charge bonus, then that number there, the 46, the charge bonus, it gets added to the melee attack, which is the accuracy in melee, and your damage as well. So yeah, that's what we're working with here. Let's speed things up a little bit. Peasants are just going to get into position. There's going to be a big scrap over the centre here. Now the thing is with Slaanesh, Slaanesh has absolutely no range troops. What this means is that the only way that Slaanesh can deal with all these flyers is to bring their own flyers. But they only have one unit that's flying, and that is Chaos Furies of Slaanesh. Chaos Furies of Slaanesh are only tier 1 infantry. They will get absolutely wrecked by Great Longbows on the charge because of Great Longbows' 75 charge bonus. Furthermore, if you bring the Lord Magistrate, there is an item that you can equip called the Kite of the Uttermost Airs. This passively does 25 to 50 DPS to all enemy flying units within 55 meters of the Lord Magistrate, so it passively damages the Furies. You then combine this with this ability that the Lord Magistrate has, an active buff that he can use once every 60 seconds that gives one nearby troop 20% extra charge bonus and 24 melee attack. You're looking at great Longbow Riders with a charge bonus of nearly 100 and over 50 melee attack. They will just kill the Furies. They will knock off 75% of their HP instantly. So basically, Slaanesh cannot contest in any way this Air Force, and that's amazing, because what it allows you to do, it allows you to hang your Sky Junks on top of your Cathay infantry to exploit the Harmony mechanic. Now for those of you who aren't familiar with the Harmony mechanic, melee troops in Cathay are Yang, ranged troops are Yin. When they are within close proximity to one another, they both get a buff. By default it is +6 leadership, +6 melee defense, and then you get reload skill for your ranged troops, effectively making them do more DPS. Now if you look over here, there is a Harmony amplifier of 25% for the Sky Junk, so it further multiplies that bonus. The Magistrate actually amplifies it by 50%, so if he is within range of this, then they'll get even more melee defense and leadership, and this makes them extremely good at holding the line. Check this out. Exalted Demonettes of Slaanesh, they are now being focus fired by my Peasant Archers, an extremely cheap unit costing only about one quarter of the cost that Peasant Archers do. They're actually not shooting them yet, but they're going to in a second. Here we go. Shots coming in. Look at all that. This is such a tiny distance from like here to here. Shooting those Exalted Demonettes of Slaanesh inflicted all that damage. This is why you don't lead with the Exalted Demonettes of Slaanesh, and it's also why ranged troops are absolutely vital for Cathay in this matchup. You can't expect to beat Slaanesh in melee. Slaanesh is a freaking melee. It does way too much damage. You're not going to beat them. You need to rely on your other tools. You rely on the massive Harmony buffs from your Sky Lanterns, which effectively can't be touched so long as you keep the Great Longbows alive. Then they are completely safe. Nothing can touch them, only Furies. And then you use your ranged troops to inflict most of the DPS, whilst your Harmony buffed defensive troops hold the line. Now this is going to be a really scrappy game. We've got a lot of melee troops on each side. Sky Junk's doing a lot of damage. The set formations here for the Cathayan troops provide you with a really good opportunity to get off bombardment spells later on if you bring in an Alchemist, which is what I actually do later, as well as getting the bombardments from the Sky Junk itself. We actually see some lashes of Slaanesh coming down here. Now I'm very lucky that this opponent wasn't actually utilising Shadow Magic. The Pendulum at the moment is an absolutely busted spell, which basically takes off 80% of the HP of Jade Warriors with Halberds instantly, and that's another reason why I really recommend bringing a mass of Peasant troops as Cathay, rather than relying on Jade Warriors. Not to mention, Slaanesh themselves, they don't have a lot of armour, so you don't need the armour piercing of Jade Warriors, and Slaanesh has loads of armour piercing themselves, so you don't need the armour of Jade Warriors. So a lot of that money that you spend on your Jade Warriors is kind of redundant. So we've got a lot going on. We've got Exalted Demonettes kind of tied up in here. I didn't want them getting around the back and hitting these guys in the rear because they would tear through my infantry very quickly, so I initiate cavalry into them to do some damage. But over on this side, this squad of Jade Lancers has been caught by the Heartseekers of Slaanesh, which are the most elite infantry. So I counter-initiate with my Great Longbow Riders, buffed by Inspired Defense because they get counter-initiated by Hellstriders. And then in order to counter the Hellstriders, I pulled my Jade Lancers out and hit them in the back. So this is a very atrocious fight. All these cavalry are getting kind of wrecked, and it means that these Exalted Demonettes are now freed up to get onto my back line. Now fortunately the opponent doesn't loop around with them and hit these melee troops in the back, because that would have routed them both very quickly. That probably would have been quite a good idea. But I'm lucky and he doesn't, and he actually gets kind of tied up on some Peasant Long Spearmen. But the problem that I have right now is that my initial 2 range units of Peasant Archers have got compromised by the masses of Slaaneshi cavalry and infantry. And it means that I'm mostly relying now on melee troops to deal with Slaanesh, which is not ideal by any stretch of the imagination. I actually think this was a bit of a mistake, and I definitely should have took a lot more Peasant Archers in the reinforcing army to bring them in and help out. I don't know if I mentioned it at the start of the match, but you choose a certain army at the start, a small army, and then you get to bring in more reinforcing troops throughout the match based on the supplies, which they come in at a base rate, and it gets modified slightly via a combat mechanic and also the amount of damage that you inflict on the opponent. Anyway, at this point I'm actually spawning a group of Peasant Horsemen, trying to rush them down to the back VP. but unfortunately the enemy is actually ready for me with some Marauders of Slaanesh ready to attack. Now he actually sent most of his troops down this way, so he's only just catching the back VP at the moment, and it actually keeps him really far behind actually on VPs. Oh, at this point I've actually got an Alchemist as well as my hero coming out now, so because obviously this initial army that I've chosen with a Lord Magistrate, a Sky Junker, and Longmire Riders, none of them do magic. Like, they actually have no spells. And you really do want to always have a caster. The value of having magic is really quite hard to quantify. It's nearly always going to justify the cost. Now obviously there's diminishing returns on that because you only have a limited winds of magic that you can use per battle. But yeah, you do want to eventually get one. So we get the Alchemist. And in terms of the Alchemist, I brought Final Transmutation for any big blob fights that happen, particularly if things like Seekers of Slaanesh or Heart Seekers are involved, really expensive units. This is a very powerful spell to use in an AoE. Against all the Marauder spam, I've got Searing Doom, much cheaper spell, but just does good AoE damage to light targets. And I've also got Transmutation of Lead for any intense cavalry fights. I can reduce the damage and melee attack of the enemy cavalry in an AoE, which should help me get the advantage. Here comes a nice Searing Doom. Just as the other Marauders join the fight, get some really good damage value on the troops there. Very cost effective. Bit of a gimped charge, if I'm honest with you. These Jade Lancers kind of coming in at an awkward side angle rather than the full rear, but I have to back out them because Fiends of Slaanesh come in. These things are absolutely terrifying. Only 12 models in the squad, but that is a good thing because, like I say, it means you don't get any DPS bleed when they start to lose models. So they're definitely pushing back my cavalry, and that is of course the plan of the Slaanesh player at the moment. He's just trying to keep this VP on his side, spamming me with endless amounts of Marauders, and let's face it, the Cathayan infantry is very good at defense. I mean, check out these Jade Warriors right now. Beautiful little bomb from the Sky Junker as well. Jade Warrior Halberds a second ago were at 72 melee defense because of the defense leadership buff that the Magistrate can apply this one here, and then of course the amplified harmony buff too. So they're just amazing for holding the line, but the problem is they don't do a lot of damage, and this is where the peasant archers need to come in, or the Jade Warrior crossbowmen, which unfortunately for this initial build I just didn't have enough of them. I don't think I actually brought any peasant archers in my reinforcing army, and that was a huge error. Right now, while they're so blobbed up, I mean, look at all these units exposed on the edge. These are perfect targets for some ranged attacks. I do get a good Final Transmutation here. Unfortunately, most of these enemies, except for the Fiends of Slaanesh, are not very elite, but still, being able to inflict significant damage onto 4 enemies at once, quite cost effective. Good Searing Doom comes down as well, inflicting okay damage onto the Marauders. And here I get a Terracotta Sentinel. Now, I do think that the Terracotta Sentinel is fine in this matchup, particularly if the opponent, for whatever reason, decides to bring a Keeper of Slaanesh. The Terracotta Sentinel can do a lot of damage. Furthermore, against things like the Fiends, who only have 12 models, the huge amount of weapons damage that the Terracotta Sentinel inflicts, an entire 600 damage per attack, it will kill the Fiend models very quickly without getting a lot of wasted damage, essentially. But against masses of Marauders, you know, these Marauders are about a quarter of the cost of the Terracotta Sentinel. The Terracotta Sentinel just doesn't kill them very quick, even if he does trade quite well. And this is a problem because I'm just being swarmed and swarmed by hordes of infantry right now. I need to kill them as quick as possible so that I have more infantry on this damn point and I can capture the VP. So the Terracotta Sentinel, it really just doesn't do that. So I think it was a mistake to bring it out right now. I don't think it was a mistake to bring it in the army, because of course I don't know what the enemy is going to field. At this point he could have a Keeper of Seekers running around, he could have Fiends running around. He has already got one squad of Fiends, but they're nearly dead at this point. He could also have a bunch of Heart Seekers or Exalted Demonettes, and all these things are great targets for the Terracotta Sentinel, because the Terracotta Sentinel does have magic damage, so not only does he have the huge 600 base weapon damage, but he's going to circumvent the natural 20% physical resistance that demons get. So he's just very cost effective against them, but not infantry, and right now honestly my problem is infantry. So right now the best thing for me to have would be to have a line of archers here, 2 peasant archers and 1 jade crossbow, instead of all these halberds and spearmen coming in to reinforce. They're just not good enough because they're taking too long to get rid of the enemy forces. Now, I must admit the Sky Lantern and the Sky Junk in this instance have done absolutely fantastic. 264 kills in the Sky Junk at this point. And how many on the Magistrate? Only 92, but over 1,000 value. And of course, what that doesn't account for is the value of all these constant buffs. All these free, as well as the Harmony Amplifier of 50% in addition to that. So that doesn't get counted. I think this is a really valuable unit. A little bit of idling, unfortunately, from the Jade Lancers at the back. These guys really need to be moving forward and trying to get a flank on the Slaaneshi infantry, but they're just so cost effective. Every time I'm sending more troops in, there's just some more Slaaneshi Marauders to replace it. And this is kind of a problem for Cathay. They're a very defensive faction. They don't have... well, you know, they haven't got Marauders of Slaanesh with sword arms. They don't have Khorne Berserkers with two-handed axes. They don't have... Kislevites Bear Cavalry. They don't have high damage units. Their units are very sturdy with good armor, good melee defense. They're good at holding the line. But when they're just throwing hordes and hordes of marauders at me, I don't need holding the line. I need kill the fuckers as fast as possible. So what I need to be doing is not relying on infantry here. I need the ranged units, and as you can see, I'm clearly not doing that. So for that reason, I'm just not getting through these guys quick enough. Here's another engagement that's really vital. Watch how quickly these Jade Warriors get wrecked, because I'm being attacked by Exalted Demonettes on the side. So this is a missed micro by me. I've forced off these Marauders, and my Jade Warriors are just chasing them, and it's just allowed the Exalted Demonettes to hit them in the side. So look how quickly they die, man. And then, obviously, all that damage weakens their leadership. Then once the Jade Warriors start to waver, like right now, the Demonettes get an even bigger buff. Now the Demonettes are getting +8 extra melee attack because of the Soul Scent ability. Well, +4 right now. And it just keeps going up, more and more units are wavering. So they're going to rip them to pieces, especially because the Demonettes themselves are so fast. Let's have a look at the Alchemist, see what she's done so far. So she does have 171 kills, pretty good value, over 1,000 overall. I think it's quite undeniable that the mages do a lot of value in this matchup, but probably could have done with her a little bit sooner as well. As you can see, the sheer quantity of Marauders here is just too much, and I don't have the DPS to do it. Finally, these Peasant Archers do get rebought from the initial army, but it's a little bit... just too late, really. I mean, look at that, 784 value on a unit that only costs 450. Extremely cost effective. But at that point, run out of VPs. Can't quite get my forces onto this VP to capture it. And it was a pretty close game in the end. Less than 1,000 VPs in it. Mostly in part because the opponent chose to avoid capping their natural VP for quite some time. Definitely a major mistake on their end. But unfortunately, the forces of Cathay there lose it against the Slaaneshi forces because the infantry just cannot get through them quick enough. So lessons to be learned: need more ranged units if you want to fight Slaanesh. Moving into the post-battle screen then, if we just analyse this for a short while, you can actually look at the value that both the Skyjunk and the Lord Magistrate got. Immense value. Absolutely immense. 2,500 value on the Skyjunk. Actually got itself to rank 3 from the sheer amount of units that it killed. 1,300 on the Lord Magistrate. And as I say, that 1,300 value is understating the strategic value of this guy. You've got the leadership buffs, you've got the melee defense buffs, and you've got the harmony amplification buffs that he's doing, plus the free active buffs that happen on a 1-minute cooldown as well. None of that value is being accounted for in the 1,300 here, but that alone is paying for itself. Longmas didn't quite pay for themselves, but they got very, very close. The enemy didn't actually bring a lot of Furies in his initial army, which is wise. I think what you want to be doing from the Slaanesh perspective, because Longmas will easily defeat your Furies, you want to wait, bring the Furies. Has he got any in here? No, he doesn't actually have any here. Of course, you can summon 2 Furies from the Herald of Slaanesh, but I actually recommend bringing some of the Reinforcements army. Just wait and see whether they bring Longmas. If they bring Longmas, don't bring Furies, because the Longmas are going to counter them, but wait for the Longmas to actually engage in the melee fights. Really focus them down using your high mass units, you know, get your Hellstriders in there to pin them down and kill them. As soon as those Longmas are dead, that's when you bring your Furies in and you go after their Skyjunk and wipe it out. If you don't, that thing's going to be shooting for the entire game. I don't know if I mentioned it, but whilst the rockets on the Skyjunk do run out of ammo, the actual gunners inside it have infinite ammo. So it's just going to keep accruing and accruing and accruing more and more value until you finally kill it. So that is one thing that you can do with the fiends to try and the Furies, sorry, to try and deal with the Skyjunk. Now, if you look at the Exalted Demonettes, they actually did amazing. The value here is actually inflated, and it's not actually. I mean, they're not really very cost effective because when you repurchase the units later into the match, it actually adds to their value here. So really, both of these Demonettes hit the field twice, so you need to divide the value of them by 2, and that would make them not very cost effective. However, the second time they come out, they did amazing. The first time they came out, they weren't very good because they were running into peasant spearmen and they were taking shots from my crane gunners and they were taking shots from my peasant archers. However, the second time they hit the field, all my melee was already tied up by marauders and my peasant archers had already been routed, so these guys just wiped the floor with my army from the flanks, and that's what you need to do. The counterplay from the Cathay end is to try and control them with your high mass cavalry, but more importantly to actually have a lot of ranged units ready to shoot them to death. So you can see that I brought 2 peasant archers in my initial army. These guys cost 450, both of them got nearly double their value. Super cost effective, but unfortunately then I didn't actually bring any more ranged units in my secondary army. I don't know why. All I brought was the Grand Cannon, which on some maps I suppose would be valuable, or if the opponent is going for a very elite army with a lot of Heartseekers, with a Keeper of Secrets, you could use the cannon. But against this spam of marauders that my opponent brought, there was no chance I was ever going to get a cannon out. I couldn't even keep my peasants alive. So a massive compositional error on my end, and something I adjusted because this was a build that I made very early on into the game's life cycle. You need more ranged units. Peasant archers are fantastic. Peasants in general, you want to be spamming as Cathay, because with the Harmony Amplifier, I think these 2 units are great. In fact, for these 3 units here, I think it's a great opening for Cathay. And you can see in the early game, I kind of did dominate this Slaanesh player, but it all just fell apart. Once these peasant archers got routed, there wasn't a whole lot that I could do, and these reinforcing troops just weren't good enough. The Sun Sentinel, as I say, I think it does have value, but it has value in killing elite Slaaneshi troop options, but they didn't bring any here. So for me to wait for 1,500 gold and field that was a mistake. I needed ranged troops. I needed more mass on the field to deal with their quantities of infantry. Finally then, if we take a look at the magic, the Alchemist I think was actually really good. The ability to bring Final Transmutation, as well as the ability to bring Searing Doom, gives you good options against both Slaaneshi builds. If they're focusing on things like Heartseekers, Exalted Demonettes, Fiends, you can Final Transmutation them to get really high damage, especially an Overcast one. But if they're focusing on Marauders, then you just constantly drop down Searing Dooms. Either way, you can get some really good value, and the 1,229 there definitely paid for itself. Furthermore, the Alchemist can bring the one-time usability to give massive melee attack bonuses to your troops, as well as magical damage. That can be exactly what you need in order to make your Cathayan melee troops actually decent against demons, because magical attacks will circumvent the 20% resistance to physical attacks that demons normally get. And Cathay troops in general, they've got really high melee defense but not very good melee attack, so that buff can be really valuable. In terms of magic attack on their end, the Herald of Slaanesh definitely paid for itself. Probably could have got a little bit more value, but it was kind of getting shot constantly by the Skyjunks, and there's not a lot that you can do in this matchup. what would definitely have been better, but honestly feels a little bit cheesy at the moment. Instead of going for the Herald of Slaanesh and using the Slaaneshi's Whip, you go for the Herald of Shadows and you use Pendulum, and it will wipe you out very quickly. But from the perspective of the Slaaneshi player, when you use Pendulum, just note that it will do basically as much damage to Jade Warriors as it does to Peasant Spearmen. So generally, wait to see where the enemy Jade Warriors are, hit them with the Pendulum, and you're going to get some really good value. Pendulum at the moment, though, it is pretty much universally agreed very overpowered. I would expect it to be nerfed at some point, so don't become too reliant on that. Slaaneshi's whip attack, that spell, I can't even remember the name of the spell. Lash of Slaanesh, it's good. It does the same sort of thing, but with a more balanced damage profile. It has less armor piercing, so it's better against peasants. One final thing to note, you never want to really be doubling up with your defensive troops as Cathay against the enemy marauders for precisely that reason. Whether they're using Lore of Slaanesh or Lore of Shadows, if you have both your halberds and your spearmen in a line, they're just becoming easy targets. So tell me what you guys thought about this cast. This is obviously the first cast I've done for this channel on Total Warhammer 3. We're going to be covering a lot of Cathay initially because it's the first faction I'm trying to learn. Yes, even before Slaanesh. I know, I just feel like Cathay it's the underdog faction because they're really shit. If I'm being explicit, they're rubbish. They absolutely fail in the matchups against both Khorne and Tzeentch, and they're probably, along with Nurgle, the worst faction-wise, balance-wise right now. But they're also a very well-rounded roster, so the fact that they're underpowered and they're a well-rounded roster, I feel like if I can beat most opponents with Cathay, then I should be in a good stead to get decent at the multiplayer, certainly when I swap to more overpowered races. But yeah, this first week it's going to feature free cast with Cathay, and the weeks after will feature some other factions. We'll obviously be doing Slaanesh next, but comment down below what factions you want me to cover next. I'm learning this as I go along. I'm obviously not a pro at Total Warhammer multiplayer yet, but I'm going to try my best to get good, and hopefully it will be entertaining for you guys to see my skill development over time. Don't forget to join the Discord. If you join the Discord, there is a Total Warhammer section in there where you can talk in depth with myself and a few other players about some of the matchups and some of the thoughts that you have there. And we can also arrange to do some land battles, because land battles are pretty cool because they've got a different meta to these domination battles. And I have heard that when competitions start in Total Warhammer 3, they're actually going to do a sort of best of 3 where you have to play both domination battles and land battles, and maybe even minor settlement battles. So you don't just want to learn one meta, you need to learn the meta for everything. And factions like Grand Cathay and Nurgle, who are really awful in domination, are actually really strong in land battles. So that could be pretty cool. So yeah, join that Discord if you want someone else to speak to or someone else to play with in Total Warhammer 3. You can also go in there and recommend what you want to see me play in some of these next replays. You can also send me your own replays in there if you're playing Total Warhammer 3 at the moment. That's going to be all from me, folks. Hope you enjoyed. I know that was a bit long-winded, both at the start and at the end there, but it's because a lot of people watching this, I know you guys will be from Dawn of War 2, so you're not familiar with this game. If you are from the Total Warhammer community, I do apologise about that. Some of the future casts will not be so long-winded. Thank you for tuning in, folks. That's your boy Torpid, out. Cheeky little edit for you guys at the ending here. Just putting this in to showcase my updated build for Grand Cathay versus Slaanesh. So have a look at this, and feel free to copy it if you want to get your hands on the updated build. I might actually make some paste bins as well at some point. Probably pop them in the description. But yep, that is all. Top it out.